What's up, guys? Today on Dirt Lifestyle, we're going to talk about one-ton axles. Every time I touch an axle in this shop, it doesn't matter what it's on, I get a bunch of comments from people, why don't you just put one-tons on it? Now, you guys are going to get your wish. I'm going to put some one-ton axles on my Land Rover Discovery. It's been a long time coming, and in this episode, I want to explore the different reasons why you would need one-ton axles on your rig, why you wouldn't need one-ton axles on your rig, and why I chose to do one-tons on this Discovery. There are 5 key considerations that I would recommend you think about whenever you're planning what axle belongs in what project. The first one is weight. Weight is a giant consideration that is usually overlooked. I get a lot of emails, people asking me, will a Dana 44 hold up to a 37? It's like, well, on what? On a Suzuki Samurai, on a go-kart, on a Chevy Suburban? I mean, there's all these different factors that play into it, and weight to me is number one. If you are gonna build a Chevy Suburban and you wanna take it off-road, let's say you put it on 40s, that's a really common size for people that wheel Chevy Suburbans. A 1-ton is the bare minimum and not a stock 1-ton. I think that with all that weight, even though you have like a nice, badass, heavy-duty Dana 60 in the front, I would still run chromoly shafts because it is a ton of weight and a ton of stress and strain on those axle shafts whenever you're trying to lug that Chevy Suburban up an obstacle. But if you have a Suzuki Samurai, you could take those exact same tires and you can put those on a Samurai with a built set of Toyota axles and you will be golden. You'll have no problems. Toyota axles are strong, especially whenever you are bolting them up to something that's that lightweight. So weight is a really big consideration that I think you should start with. The second consideration is going to be power. How much power are you making in your rig? So if you've got like an older Toyota, it's on 37s, you really enjoy the heck out of it, and you've got the OEM 20R that's in that bad boy, you're going to be fine with Toyota axles. You shouldn't have too many issues, especially if you put some decent shafts and stuff in there. But if you want to put a Chevy 6.0 in the exact same truck, you are going to be ripping through ring and pinions like there's no tomorrow. So it definitely makes a big difference how much power you're making. Usually power will translate to a broken ring and pinion, but it can absolutely translate into a broken axle shaft as well. It's just when I think of power and I'm considering something like this, I'm usually considering the size of my ring and pinion. The third consideration is use. What are you going to be doing with the rig? For this example, let's talk about a JKU. It's a very common platform. It's one of those 4-door Jeep Wranglers that everybody loves these days. If you put it on 37s and you go to the mall, no problems. Those JKU-R axles are going to handle it, no problem. Dana 44s front and rear. But if you want to take it and start doing some overlanding and some things like that, you're going to be adding a bunch of weight into that bad boy. You're definitely going to want to put some axle trusses and beef up the internals of those axles, and you'll be fine. But if you want to start doing the hardest trails in America, and let's say you want to load up your JK Rubicon with 4 people and a bunch of gear and parts and tools in the back and go hit backdoor in Johnson Valley, California, you 100% are going to need 1-ton axles, because even a really beefed up set of Dana 44s with all that weight on them and with that much demand is going to need some 1-ton axles. So your use will change what kind of axles you can get away with. As much as you could just say put tons on everything, it doesn't make sense to put 1-tons on a JK that's on 35s. So it's one of those things where you just got to weigh the pros and cons and consider what your use is going to be, and then you can decide what size axles you need. The fourth thing to consider is tire size. Now, a lot of people look at tire size as the first thing to consider, but to me, this still comes after the other things that we've already talked about. So your tire size will very directly correlate with what size axle shaft you're going to need. Axle shafts are usually measured in spline count. So like a 30 spline is your typical Dana 44. Newer Dana 44s have like 32 splines and stuff like that, but 30 is kind of the benchmark. Then if you want to go to a Dana 60 or to 35 spline, and I mean, you can even get 40 spline if you want to go crazy. But the tire size will definitely decide how big your axle shafts need to be whenever you compound it with these other factors that we've already talked about. The fifth and last thing I think you should consider would be your future plans. If you've got a Jeep Cherokee on 33s and you just love this thing, you want to go to a 35 eventually, your Dana 30 will handle that if you build it right. If you want to go to a 37, that's borderline. So I would definitely recommend a Dana 44 for a 37 on a Cherokee, but you can build the crap out of a Dana 30 and make it handle that as long as you keep your weight down. If you want to go to a 40, you can handle a 40 with a built Dana 44 on a Cherokee, but you're gonna wanna keep your weight down there too. I mean, it's so easy to add weight to a vehicle when you're talking about frame stiffeners, a roll cage, big steel sliders, big steel armor, big steel bumpers front and back, a winch. If you decide you want to go out one time and you fill all 4 seats with people and you put a bunch of water and gear and food in the back, it gets way too heavy to have a Dana 44 with 40s and have it be reliable. So at that point, if you want to keep all of these things and have all this flexibility in your rig with armor and a winch and all this stuff, I would definitely recommend a 1-ton for 40s in that scenario. My main wheeler is a 2002 Jeep Wrangler. It's on 40-inch tall tires, and I'm only running a 1/2-ton axle, so it's got a Dana 44 front axle and a 4.9-inch rear axle. These axles stay alive because they are filled with really good high-end components, and I did everything I could to keep the weight down on this rig. So it's got aluminum bumpers, aluminum doors, it has a 5-gallon aluminum fuel cell. All of this stuff adds up to where you are losing hundreds and hundreds of pounds over what it came with stock. I even run a soft top because it's just really lightweight. I went so far as to put a lightweight aluminum engine in it that's about 300 pounds. Not only is it lighter than the 4.0 that came in this Jeep, but the engine is really short. So there's a whole bunch of space between the front axle and the front of the engine. That takes that small 300-pound footprint and it spreads it over the rest of the vehicle, keeping a bunch of that weight off of the front axle. If you lighten your vehicle enough, you'd be amazed at how strong you can make an axle and how long you can keep it alive. I announced a couple days ago on my social media that I was gonna be doing a 1-ton swap on the Land Rover, and I was really surprised at the mixed responses that I got whenever I announced it. Some of you guys were like me, you think, oh cool, that'll be an interesting build. But there was a bunch of people that were saying, what a waste, I can't believe that you would spend the time putting 1-tons on a Land Rover, basically saying it doesn't need it, the Rover axles are adequate. But when you start to look at this objectively, you start to look at the fact that it is already heavy out of the box. It's just 4,900 pounds in stock form, and this is not in stock form. You got steel bumpers, steel sliders, 150-pound tent on the roof, plus the weight of the rack. I mean, it adds up fast. I think that just my family and the weight of a stock Rover would probably be like 5,300. And then you start to add all this steel, the winch. We're gonna have 37s on this. It's gonna be 6,500 pounds easy when it's fully loaded with all of our gear, water, my overweight dog. It's all going to add. So I could beef up the stock Land Rover axles, but even without all that weight, these little guys are not gonna be up to the task of staying together with a 37. And then on top of that, there's other factors. Do we wanna be able to stop all that weight? Hell yeah, we do. So this requires a 1-ton axle, believe it or not. I mean, this is such a good case for when you need a 1-ton axle. I don't think 1/2-tons would be able to do what we need to do with this. This Land Rover is gonna do the Rubicon Trail. So it needs to be very reliable, it needs to be very strong, and it's gotta be able to stop. We're gonna do more in this series than just build a couple of awesome axles. We are going to build some awesome suspension. I've got a whole bunch of parts and pieces on here from Barnes 4-wheel drive. And the reason I wanna rebuild it is that the Rover suspension isn't bad, honestly. It's coils front and rear. The ride is not terrible, but you can look at the geometry and you can very quickly see that there is a lot of room for improvement. So my goal is to make it more stable on the road at highway speeds and to make it more comfortable off-road whenever I'm wheeling through a whole bunch of big bouldery back roads. I'm gonna be working with Barnes 4-wheel drive on this build. If you guys have watched my channel before, you know I'm a huge fan of Ballistic. Ballistic is a great company and I'm gonna continue to work with them on the TJ. But for this Land Rover, I decided to mix it up. My taste in vehicles is vast, as you can see, and my taste in products is also vast. So I'm gonna try out this company. They've got a great reputation. You know, they make these enduro joints in the United States, which I think is pretty awesome. And I look forward to giving it a shot. But we're gonna use the parts and pieces that are on this table to build a one-of-a-kind suspension that's gonna meet all of our needs. Every 1-ton axle swap starts the same way. You've gotta locate your axles, you've gotta get them home, and then you gotta start the cleaning process. So I'm gonna use a plasma cutter, I'm gonna cut off the bulk of these brackets, and then I'm gonna clean it up with an angle grinder and with an air hammer. Now I have some extra hurdles that I have to cross here that a lot of people don't, and that is I'm gonna have to relocate this front center section. This is a driver side drop high pinion axle, and I need to make it a passenger side drop high pinion axle. It is a passenger side drop transfer case, so we have to match. I'm going to be cutting this axle in the next episode. We're going to be relocating this center section over to the passenger side, and then we're going to put a nice strong truss on it to keep it from bending. There's a bunch of really basic techniques that you can use in order to do this, and I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to use basic things that I have laying around the shop in order to make sure that this axle is as true as possible, and then we're going to bolt it all back together and see if it works. While I was grinding and prepping these rear axles, I was thinking of a few questions I think you guys are going to be asking in the comments, so I'm just going to take care of them right now. First one, how much wider is a Super Duty axle versus Land Rover axles? And no matter what your swap is, you're definitely gonna have to think about this. With the Land Rover axles, it actually has a 2-inch wheel spacer as it sits right now on each side. And I've measured it before, and it was 67 inches from wheel mount surface to wheel mount surface. And on this Super Duty axle, I just measured it, we're at 68 inches from wheel mount surface to wheel mount surface. So we're only adding an inch overall, which means that if we were able to use these same wheels and tires, which we couldn't, but we'd only be looking at a 1/2 inch wider on each side than you're looking at right now. So that's completely doable with the right offset of rim. The other question I think is going to be ABS. If you look close, you'll notice there are ABS sensors already in this. Most ABS systems are really similar, I guess. So I'm optimistic that I can figure out a way to adapt the ABS system on the Land Rover to these axles. And this goes into the third question I think I'm gonna be getting, which is why choose Super Duty axles, and even more specifically, why choose the 2004 and older Super Duty axles. So if you don't know, all Super Duty axles come with ABS built in. That's one of the reasons I like them. They're also really inexpensive when you compare them to the old Ford high pinion Dana 60s. So those are kingpin. There's always an argument which is better. I don't care. These are gonna be plenty strong. One of the reasons I chose these is because these were really inexpensive. This front axle is $300. The rear axle I have seen for $100, and I should have jumped on it, but because of the quarantine, I wanted to get this thing in the shop because I wanted to start this project and not have a situation where I couldn't get one and then not have anything to work on. So I spent $300 on the rear too. Again, it's just, I wish that I would have jumped on the ones that I've seen for $100 on Craigslist. But anyway, I'm only $600 in the full set of 1-ton axles. I think that's pretty good. And if you look at the older versions, if you look at the older Ford high pinion axles, Dana 60s, they are really expensive. You could be looking at $1,200 for a set, easy. Another question I think people are gonna be asking is the Sterling 10.5, which is this rear axle here. Is this as good, or how does it compare to a 14 bolt? It's gonna be just as strong. It's the same spline count axle. What's nice about these versus the 14 bolt is it comes with disc brake stock, and it comes with the same bolt pattern that you see here. Super Duties have a weird bolt pattern. It's like 8 on 170. It's a metric bolt pattern instead of your traditional 8 on 6.5. So these are all the reasons as to why I have this set up as it is. Now, if you compare the 2004 and older Super Duty axles to the newer Super Duty axles, meaning 05 and newer, the 05 and newer have a larger U-joint right here, and they have a 35 spline stub shaft, which is thicker than what you're gonna see here. These are only a 30 spline stub shaft. I see why people use those. They're more money, but right out of the box, they are stronger. The only issue that I have is that I've seen the newer Super Duty axles break in the exact same place that these Super Duty axles break, and that's right here. This meat that's around the U-joint, it fails no matter what your spline count is on the stub. I haven't seen people break stubs on these or the newer Super Duty axles, but I have seen 2 Jeeps that were both on 40s, one with an 04 like this and one with an 05 Super Duty axle, and both of them ripped right around the ears, and they both broke, not axle shafts, but they broke the axle ears. So it didn't matter that the newer ones were stronger because of where the weak point is. I'm gonna be getting either chromoly or RCVs in these. I don't know which ones yet. I'm still emailing different companies to see what my options are. But anyway, those are the basics. I've got one more thing to cover. I think people are gonna be asking me about the offset of the rear pinion. So the offset of the rear axle is passenger side. Isn't that weird? There's only a few vehicle manufacturers I've seen do this. And so that means that, the way it is right now, it lines up with the transfer case output. So how is that gonna affect my rear axle? I measured, and it's only 3.5 inches different. So that means that the pinion out of the transfer case is only 3.5 inches over from the pinion on this rear axle. So I'm working with my drive shaft company. I'm giving them all the measurements and stuff, and they're gonna let me know if that'll work. If that won't work and I can't make up for that with the right drive shaft, plan B is to cut the passenger side down 3.5 inches, because that will line this up. And then what I'll probably end up doing is shortening the front as well. I'll be cutting the front axle no matter what I do. So it's not a big deal to just cut whatever I need to match the rear. I haven't figured those details out yet, but before the next video comes out, I definitely will. I know this episode was super information heavy, and I apologize in advance for that. The next episode, we're gonna do a ton of fab. I'm gonna be cutting that front axle into pieces. We're gonna be building a custom truss for the front and rear axle, welding it all up. I'm gonna be doing a whole lot of fabrication in the next one. It'll be much less intense when it comes to the information. Thank you so much for hanging in there. If you guys wanna help support the channel, you can go to thedirtlifestyle.com. You can get t-shirts, hats, so, sweatshirts, things like that. If you wanna follow me on social media, I'm @DirtLifestyleNate. We'll see you next time.